So last day we were discussing bilinear pairing. So what is bilinear pairing? So as you can see, bilinear pairing is a mapping of function from G1 cross G1 to G2. G1 is an additive abelian group, G2 multiplicative abelian group. G1 cross G1 meaning Cartesian product of G1 and G1. That means it takes two inputs. So it is a binary function. Two inputs meaning binary function. So as a special case, examples of G1 and G2 are, so G1 in general is additive abelian group and G2 in general is multiplicative abelian group. Special case G1 is elliptic curve group, which is also an additive abelian group, and G2 is our FP, ZP plus and multiplication, which is also multiplicative group. So three properties must be satisfied. The first one is bilinearity, which states this thing, where P and Q are any 2 points on the elliptic curve and A and B are scalars from FP, the field on which the elliptic curve is defined. So simply the multipliers, scalars should go to the exponent. This must be satisfied for all values of P and Q and for all values of A and B. Second property is little bit complex to understand, which is called non-degeneracy. That means, in other words, it should be generative. Which should be generative? This function should be generative. Now, as we have explained that if these things are already stated that G1 and G2 are two cyclic groups, G1 abelian additive group, G2. Both are of order Q, sizes of the two groups are same, and that is Q. Q is also a prime number, and P is a generator of G1. So all the points of G1 can be generated from P. So in other words, if you take any point x, that is some x into P, where for some x in P or G2, because all points are 1P, 2P, 3P up to QP in G1, right? Now, if P is the generator, then EPP must not be the identity element in G2. See, in many papers you will study, after this you will study many papers, you will see this property is written in varieties of forms. This is one format to state this thing, that if P is a generator and P is not the 0 point, then EPP is not identity element in G2, stated in this notation I G2. Last class we have explained that this is equivalent to say that when P is a generator of G1, EPP is a generator of G2. So this statement comes actually from this statement, and actually it can be proved that that statement also implies this statement. Although that part we have not discussed, but if you exercise that thing, you will get that that statement also implies this statement. Like this statement implies that, that statement also implies this statement. That means, in other words, two statements are equivalent or equal, same. That means this statement that EPP is not identity in G2 and saying that EPP is generator of G2 is same. And another way also it can be stated. See, we have said that G1 additive abelian group and G2. Now in special case, G2 is FP. In that case, which one is the identity element in G2? If G2, in a special case, if G2 is nothing but FP, then what is the identity element in G2? What is the identity element in G2? 1. So that means it can be stated in that way also, that EPP not equal to 1. Some papers you will find it is written EPP not equal to 1. Some papers write EPP not equal to IG2. Meaning this is actually specific case where we are assuming that G1 is elliptic curve group and G2 is FP. But this is a generic statement where we are not assuming that G2 is necessarily FP. In general, we are saying identity element of G2. But if we assume that G2 is the multiplicative group, then of course the identity element is 1. Now why this statement and EPP is a generator of G2 are same, that we have also discussed in the last class. I am revising again. Why EPP should be a generator of G2 if this is true, EPP not equal to identity in G2. Now let us say, so what is the output of, what is EPP? So of course, we don't know what is EPP, but it is an element in G2. This is the definition is saying. The output of this function is in G2. So let us say this is G. Assume that this is G, where of course G belongs to G2, and if G2 is Fp, then G is in Fp, that means something between 1 and p minus 1, because Fp is nothing but, this is what? This is 1 to p minus 1 plus and multiplication. So G is that element. What is G? Output of EPP. What is P? P is the generator of G1. If elliptic curve, then P is the generator of the elliptic curve group. Remember, G1 is not the entire elliptic curve. G1 is a subgroup, cyclic subgroup of the elliptic curve. We have chosen a subset of the points from the elliptic curve, but not any subset. We chosen in a way so that it is also a group. Like you know that if we choose a subset of the numbers from Z11, it will not be a group always. You have to be careful in choosing the elements so that it still remains a group. So in that way we have chosen. Simply what we do is exactly, we take actually, instead of choosing subset of elements from the elliptic curve group, we choose any arbitrary point of the elliptic curve group. Meaning you take any arbitrary point on the elliptic curve group, let's say that is P, and then you generate the subgroup from P. In P, 2P, 3P in this way, until it repeats some element in that group. That means generate the cyclic subgroup generated from P and check whether the size of the subgroup is a prime number and large prime number or not. In that way we generate. Anyway, so P is the generator. Now, step by step we have proved this thing. So, what would be the set of outputs of E? What would be the set of outputs of E? We are checking whether this bilinear mapping function can generate all the elements in G2 or not. By using this function E, we can generate all the elements of G2 or not, that we are checking. Now, we can give any inputs to this function, any two inputs to this function. Let's say the inputs are x and y, where x is some point on the elliptic curve and y is another point on the elliptic curve. Now we are interested to check that, so x is some point and not some point on the elliptic curve, x is some point on G1 and y is some point on G1, because we said that G1 is the subset of the elliptic curve. Now you can take any point as x, any point as y from G1. So create all such possibilities, combinations, and then whatever the outputs are getting generated, take it in a bucket. Are you getting my point? You are taking all possible combinations of x and y. X should be some point in G1, y should be some point in G1. Then this bucket is equal to G2 or not, that we are checking. If this bucket is less than G2, then that means it cannot be greater than G2, because the definition is saying that the element must be in G2, domain, codomain is G2. Now it could be, but that does not mean that all the elements of G2 should be present. It is only the codomain. So if it is less than G2, then this function is not the generator, is not generating the group, is not generating all the elements of the group. In short, it is not generating the group. So that we have to check whether this is generating the group or not. This bilinear map is generating. If this is not generating, then that is degenerating. We don't want degenerating group. Non-degeneracy property is important. That means it should be generating. Now let us see whether it can generate all the elements or not. Now you are taking all combinations of x and y. Now first property that we have proved is any two inputs x and y, it can be stated as if it is ZP for some Z in G1 which is representative of x and y. Which is representative of x and y for some other unique point, not arbitrary any point. Z is not. If x is fixed, y is fixed, then there is another point in G1, fixed point, which is the representative of both x and y, and this is equal to this for some z in G1. This we have proved. How? This is easy to prove, because x is equal to x into p, y is equal to y into p for some x scalar, for some y scalar in AP. Then according to the formula, what is EXY? So this is EXPYP. So this is EPP power XY, and this also we can write as XY into P comma P, because again applying the same rule number 1. Now x and y, scalar into scalar is a scalar. So this I can say as if it is ZP. Now ZP is a point multiplication, so it is a point also in G1. So that we are stating as capital Z. So proved. So that means you are checking this set with all combinations of x and y is equivalent to say or state that you are checking the output set of this for all possible values of z, keeping p constant, keeping the right hand side input constant. You are changing the left hand side input. So z is some point in G1, all possible points in G1. How many points are there in G1? Q points are there in G1. What are the points? Since P is the generator, so the points are P, 2P, 3P up to QP. So that means what outputs you are generating exactly? You are generating P, P, you are generating 2P, P, you are generating 3P, P up to QPP. All possible values of Z, because Z is some point in G1. Now this is already G we have assumed. Now this is what, according to rule 1, this is nothing but EPP whole square. Remember, the meaning of this is actually whole to the power AB. Not that PQ whole to the power AB then E. PQ is an integer, nothing but an integer, if G2 is the FP. So that means this is G square. So this is G cube up to this. This is G to the power K. Right? So that means this set is nothing but G square, G cube up to G to the power Q. That means this set is the cyclic subgroup generated from G. Because we are doing G square, G cube, G to the power 4, etc. So that means this is the cyclic subgroup generated from G. What is G? G is an element in G2 or FP. Now there are two possibilities. Since the size of the Lagrange's theorem says that the size of the cyclic subgroup is always a divisor of the size of the main group. Now here, what is the size of the main group? Main group is G2. G2 size is Q. Q is a prime number, so its only divisors are 1 and Q. So that means size of the subgroup might be 1 or might be Q. It cannot be anything else. Moreover, if the size of the subgroup is 1, then what is the element? Only the identity element can generate a subgroup of size 1, because we know that any group, it must contain the identity element of the group. Otherwise, it is not a group. The properties of group says, third property says, identity must be there. Identity cannot be missing. So if you take any element other than the identity element, now that element, which element you are taking, that must be present in the group, cyclic subgroup that you are generating. So if it is not the identity, then identity is also present and this element is also present. So minimum 2 items you are getting. So you cannot get size 1. Size 1 only you can get if you are taking the identity element itself. So that means size 1 can be generated if G is identity in G2. G is identity in G2. Or you are considering FP, then G is equal to 1, meaning small g. Otherwise the size of the subgroup is Q. That means it is generating all the elements in G2. That means G is a generator of G2. Who is G? EPP. EPP is a generator of G2. Proved that if EPP is not IG2, then that means EPP is the generator of G2. Both statements are same. The other way also you can try it, you can imply that EPP is the generator of G2, then EPP cannot be identity. Very, very simple thing to prove. If EPP is the generator, then it cannot be identity element in G2. Second property. Third property is very simple, saying that this function is polynomial type function. Easy. E is easy. These three properties, if satisfied, then such type of mapping is called bilinear mapping or bilinear pairing or bilinear function. Mapping and function are synonymous. Why they are called pairing? Roughly you understand, because actually various ways you can explain this thing. For example, here if you keep the right hand side constant generator P, then 2 points x and y are paired into a single point z. That way also you can think that this is called pairing. Or if you consider the output of this function, a small integer, so that is also pairing 2 points. For various reasons it is called pairing. That is not important to remember, just for knowledge I say. Okay. Now, admissibility is nothing. Admissibility meaning saying whether practically can we implement such type. Abstract definition so far only we have given. Practically can you implement such type of function? Yes. Already I have said that if you take G1 as the elliptic curve subgroup and G2 as the finite multiplicative group, then Weyl has already implemented such type of function. So that's about the admissibility of the function. Admissibility meaning whether practically you can implement. I said these abstract properties, that doesn't mean that such type of function will exist in the world, but it exists. That is admissibility. Now the last question that I have raised in the last class, that given these properties, it can be proved that E is a one-way function also if discrete log is hard. If discrete log is hard, then given these properties, it can be proved that E is a one-way function. What do you mean by one-way function? That means given E x y, or let us keep this side constant, because we have seen that xy is nothing but equivalent to zp. So given xp for some x in G1 is equal to, meaning calculating xp is equal to small x or g, h, whatever, is easy. But given G, P is global, calculate x is difficult. This is called one-way property. One-way function meaning fx is equal to y, given x is easy to calculate y, given y it is difficult to calculate x. So here P is constant, so the mapping is a point from an integer. So given x, it is easy to calculate g, gx whatever you say, not necessarily generator I say, some point, some integer. But given this g, it is difficult to calculate x. Can you prove this thing? I told you to try this thing. Can you prove? Have you? It cannot be proved. That's why that paper, I think it is written that it is believed to be one way. Have you read that identity-based encryption Patterson paper? Identity-based encryption, Bonnet paper. It is written there that it is believed to be one way. It is written. You check it. Now the point is that if discrete log is not hard, then this is not one way. If discrete log is, that you have understood. If discrete log is not hard, then it is not one way. But it cannot be proved that if it is not one way, then it is not, the discrete log is not hard. Are you getting my point or not? One by one I am explaining. If discrete log is not hard, then this function is not one way. Why? So, you were given the output of EXP. Let's say the output of EXP is H. Right? Output of EXP is H. Now, what is EXP? We know this is small xp for some small x. So, that is equal to EPP power G, EPP power X. Now, EPP is G. Already we have said. EPP is G. So, this is G power X. So, you were given H, meaning G power X. Now, if discrete log is easy, then you can calculate X from this. You know G. G is known to, because the function is given, P is generator known to also, EPP can be calculated by anybody. So, G power X is known, so you can calculate X if discrete log is easy. Now, if small x is given, then you can calculate X into P also, because that is easy. Point multiplication is easy. So, you are getting capital X. So, that means given H, you can get capital X easily if discrete log is easy. That means the one way property depends on the difficulty of discrete log. Depends on the difficulty of discrete log, meaning if discrete log is not difficult, then it is not one way. However, the reverse statement is not true. What is the reverse statement? That if discrete log is hard, that does not imply that necessarily that this is one way. Why? Because this is only one way of solving the problem. What is the problem? That given small h, you have to find capital X. This is the problem. Now, one way we have solved this thing. If discrete log is easy, then this way it can be solved. That if discrete log is easy, then find small x first, then do this multiplication, and then you are getting capital X. This is only one way of getting capital X from H. However, this does not imply that this is the only way of getting capital X from H. There might be other ways also. Bypassing this mechanism, another easy way could be there, which does not depend on calculating discrete log. So, the one way property is not implied by the difficulty of discrete log, but depends on the difficulty of discrete log. It is not implied by the difficulty of discrete log, but it depends on the difficulty of discrete log. Meaning, as long as discrete log is hard, that does not imply that this is one way. But the day discrete log will be easy, this is no more usable. This bilinear pairing we have to throw. Because you will see all the security properties are also dependent on this one way property of the bilinear mapping. So, but till date, again the same thing, no scientists, nobody has found any other algorithm, other way to find capital X from small h without solving discrete log. No other algorithm has been found, polynomial time algorithm, of course. That's why it is believed to be, not proved, it is believed to be one way also. So, that means, so since nobody has found till date, so we can relax on this assumption that given the output of EXP, it is difficult to find X. This is all about bilinear mapping. Now, the basics of identity-based encryption in the last class we have already discussed. Now, today we will see how the algorithms are mathematically implemented. how all these 4 algorithms are mathematically implemented. So first is the setup algorithm. So as you remember, so setup input is a security parameter k, which should decide the trade-off between the strength or security of the algorithm and cost. And it should output master secret S and public parameters. The public parameters which would be required later for all other algorithms. Now see, the details of the algorithm, the setup algorithm is a little bit complex, and it is important to understand for the PhDs to understand the details of this algorithm, but that you can do later when you will appear for some defense or some other thing. That time you can also revise. For the time being, I am explaining only that much which is essential for the MTechs also, and which is sufficient to write any paper, conference journal paper purpose, that would be sufficient. However, so for example, so what you are doing, first so this is the input k. What is this k? This k is nothing but the size of the prime number q. As I have already stated that if you take large size prime number, this actually, anyway, k is the size of the prime number, so if you take larger size prime number, the security is larger. As I have already explained last class, that if you take small prime number, if you take prime number as 11, then do you think that discrete log is really hard? You give me any index, I can give you the base in 5 minutes, calculating in paper and pencil. So Q should be very large, and of course the difficulty of the adversary, meaning the time taken by the computing algorithm to find the discrete log, would be so large that it cannot even solve it in 1 year. So, however, if Q is large, then the inputs are also large, because you are taking all the inputs from that group, FP or FQ. If you take large prime numbers, then large inputs also you will get. You have to process those inputs, so cost of the algorithms are also high. So that is the security parameter. You decide what should be your strength, depending on your fund, resource available. Then you choose the second prime number p, small p. We use here 2 prime numbers. One is q, another is p. Q is the size of G1 and G2, as I have already stated, and p is the prime field Fp on which the elliptic curve is defined, as I have stated, E over Fp. E over Fp. The elliptic curve group is defined on the prime field Fp. So now second step is to choose an appropriate value of p. Now there are some rules, like p should be congruent to, equivalent to 2 mod 3. P should be L into Q minus 1 for any integer L, and Q should be a prime factor of P plus 1. Why these properties are essential, that you do not need to understand, at least for the time being. If these properties are satisfied, then only the elliptic curve group will be secure. Now then you can define one elliptic curve like this, y square equal to x cube plus 1. Check that now the coefficients are a and b are 1, and it satisfied 4 cube plus 27 b square not equal to 1. Now define the message space. So suppose n bit messages we are dealing with. So the message space is definitely, in this notation you understand, 0 1 all to the power n, meaning a string of zeros and ones of n bits. String of zeros and ones of n bits. So that is all strings of zeros and ones of n bits are the message space, is the message space. Now you choose a generator point P from EFP, so that the order of P is equal to Q. Already I have stated. Now you take a random number S from ZQ star. This is a scalar, remember, an integer only. And then do a point multiplication S dot P. See, I have highlighted here the most important parts. like message space is this one is important and this one is important. Even if you forget these steps, this and this, you have to remember. And of course, the cipher space definition. If you forget the hash function definitions also, that is okay, but that you can check from the notes later whenever you will write the paper, etc. So what we are doing is, so what is the purpose of this setup algorithm? The setup algorithm will generate the master secret for the PKG and some public parameters. Now see the list of public parameters. This is the elliptic curve, definition of the elliptic curve. These P and Q are the prime numbers. P and Q is the size of these things. N is the size of the message. P is the generator point of the elliptic curve. E is the bilinear map that you have chosen. And H1, H2, H3, H4 are 4 hash functions. What are these hash functions that I am coming later? And M is the defined message space and C is the defined cipher space. What is PPUB? PPUB is nothing but the master secret into the generator point. Master secret is randomly chosen, nothing but randomly chosen point which must be kept secret by the PKG, of course, then multiplied by P. So this is simple point multiplication. Then we are generating this PPUB. So all these parameters are public, known to all, even known to the adversary. So P and PPUB both are known to the adversary, but he cannot calculate S from these two because this is the elliptic curve discrete log problem. Now, let me first explain the cipher space, ciphertext space. Space meaning what? Space meaning the domain, you can say, domain. Space is nothing but the domain. Like message can be taken from this domain. Similarly, ciphertext would be what? Ciphertext, you see, the Cartesian product of 3 sets is the Cartesian product of this notation states what? This is the Cartesian product of 3 sets. The first set is the elliptic curve group. The second set is n-bit strings. The third set is also n-bit strings. So that means the ciphertext will have 3 parts. The first part will be a point on the elliptic curve because this is the space. So when you are constructing a ciphertext, this is the Cartesian product of 3, meaning combinations, all possible combinations of all these 3. That means you take any element from this, then combine it with any element of this, then combine it with any element of this set. So that means that is a ciphertext. So ciphertext is essentially what? A concatenation of a point on the elliptic curve followed by an n-bit string followed by another n-bit string. So that means a ciphertext will have 3 parts. The first part is a point, second part is an n-bit string, third part is an n-bit string. This is the definition of the ciphertext space. Similarly, the message is only an n-bit string. Now, what are these H1, H2, H3, H4? These are hash functions. But please remember that these are not exactly same as the hash functions that you have studied in cryptography course. In cryptography course, you have studied about hash functions, which are something like this. Or something like this. This is the mathematical definition of a hash function and this is the practical definition of a hash function. What is the meaning of this? What it states, this definition states what? That definition states what? Any arbitrary length string is the input to the hash function and L-bit string is the output of the hash function, and this states n-bit string, not any arbitrary, because according to the mathematical definition, abstract definition, it can take any arbitrary length string, but you have studied SHA-1, SHA-256, whirlpool. Practically when we implement some program, then it is not possible to handle any arbitrary size input. So it can take maximum, but it is so large, the input is so large that for all practical purpose you can assume that the input is unlimited, size is unlimited, but practically it has a limit. But that limit is very high, that n is very high. So that means usually it is observed that this n is very large than L. L is very small, might be 256 bits, 512 bits, 64 bits, but n could be 1 GB, 10 GB, 30 GB, 40 GB, 1 terabyte, unlimited, practically unlimited. Now, however, any function which takes an n-bit string and produces an L-bit string is not, of course, a hash function. Hash function must satisfy some properties, otherwise it is not a hash function. What are the properties? Can anyone tell me? All of you, I think, have done course on cryptography, and this is the problem of pre-image resistance, collision resistance. No, there are three properties: second pre-image resistance and collision resistance. What is pre-image resistance? Bolo? So pre-image resistance is nothing but actually one-way function, one-way property. Like given a message M, it is easy to compute h of M, which is say h, but given h, it is difficult to calculate M, the pre-image of the hash function, digest. Second pre-image resistance states that suppose I have message M, one message M, M or M1, whatever. Then I have to find another message M2 so that hash of both the messages is same. This is second pre-image resistance. And collision resistance states that you are given nothing, you have to just find a couple M1 and M2 so that the hash of the two are same. The difference between this and this is that here M1 is given, here you are given nothing. Here M1 is given, you have to find another M2 so that hash of both of the messages are same. Here you are given nothing, you can just find any arbitrary couple M1 and M2 so that hash of both the messages are same. Now, a secure hash function requires that all these three should be hard. Finding pre-image should be hard, meaning non-polynomial time. Second pre-image resistance should be hard and collision resistance should be hard. Right? Security properties for a hash function. Here comes actually random oracle model. You have heard the name random oracle model. Now, what random oracle model states that, see, suppose somebody has designed a hash function. It is taking n-bit inputs, L-bit outputs. Then how can you prove that these three properties are satisfied or not? How can you prove that this is difficult, this is difficult, this is difficult? How can you prove? Now, mathematicians have proved that if you view the hash function as a black box, meaning we are not interested in the internal functioning of the hash function. It takes an n-bit input and it produces an L-bit output. That's all. We are not interested what is going on inside it. That is called abstraction. This is known as random oracle. Why it is called an oracle? Because I will give you the message and you give. Oracle is something like prophet, you have studied all these things. You ask something and it tells you the future. Now here I am giving you the message, it must give me the hash function. I am not interested to know how it is calculating, but assuming that it is honest, it is calculating honestly. And randomly I can choose message. I can give any message and it is supposed to give me the correct hash function of that, hash value of that. So that's why it is called a random oracle. Now, according to this random oracle model, mathematicians prove that if this random oracle hash function, when we view it as a random oracle, meaning we are not interested in the internal functioning of the hash function, then the hash function is called a random oracle. Now, when the hash function is viewed as a random oracle, then if it satisfies three properties, then pre-image resistance, second pre-image resistance, hard pre-image resistance, collision resistance, all are hard. It has been proved by the mathematicians. What are the three properties? Randomness, good. Independence. Actually, two properties. We say three properties. Third property is called repetition. No, repetition is automatic because the function always repeats itself. I am stating first what are the three properties. Third property, as I said, is actually very obvious, but some people explicitly tells this thing. Whenever I am giving you an n-bit string, you are supposed to give me an l-bit string, but this time I give you a fixed n-bit string, and tomorrow I give you the same n-bit string and you give me two different outputs. That is not allowed. This is called repetition on the same input. I give you the same input, you must give me the same output. Whatever output you are interested, you can give me. There is no restriction on that. However, whatever output today you give me, after 1 hour you give me the same output for the same input. You give me the same output always for the same input. And of course, any function, when you give the same input, it is supposed to give you the same output. Unless it is a randomized algorithm. The algorithm I have discussed to you, and you must be knowing that algorithms are of two types. One is called deterministic algorithm, and another is called randomized algorithms. Deterministic algorithm takes always, produces the same output, follows exactly the same steps. On the same input, it follows the same steps. However, randomized algorithm, deterministic algorithms, like artificial intelligence algorithms, like what those are called? Genetic algorithm. Such type of algorithms, the steps executed, every step is determined by the output of the previous step. And there is a randomization inside the algorithm. So, every time you get a different output from the same input. So, it is saying that it is not a randomized algorithm. It must be a deterministic algorithm. Always it should produce the same output from the same input. This is the third property. What are the first two properties? Randomness. Second property is independence. And the third property is repetitive. Repetition, whatever you say. Repetition I have already explained. Randomness. If I give you any arbitrary n-bit string message, the digest, this is called digest, has digest. The digest you are supposed to give must be random. Must be random. Meaning, it is a random element from the codomain. It should be a random element from the codomain. How many elements are there in the codomain? 2 power L. To be specific, 2 power L minus 1, but approximately 2 power L. So, it should be, so there are 2 power L in this bucket. There are 2 power L elements, 2 power L minus 1 elements. You pick an element at random. The effect should be like that. That is called randomness. When I give you, suppose I am the random oracle. You are giving me a message and I am blindly picking an element from this bucket, giving it to you. The effect should be like that. What the algorithm I am following is not. But see again, if I exactly do this thing, then it cannot ensure the third property, repetitiveness. If I blindly pick one element and give it to you or show it to you, then the next time you give me the same element, I will blindly pick another element and then show it to you, then it will not be the same. So that algorithm exactly will not work. But I am saying the effect should be like that. That means, how can you understand that it is completely random? See, you have only 2 power L options. Say 2 power L is 100. So you have only 100 options. You can give only one of these 100 options when I give you a message. Of course, when I repeat the same message, you have to give me the same output. If I 1000 times give you the same message, you have to give me the same output 1000 times. But then what is the meaning of randomness? How can you understand that the outputs are random? There should be no relation between the message and the output. There should be no relation between the message. That means, in other words, you cannot guess anything about the output without computing it. from the message. Meaning there should be no relation between the bits of the message and the bits of the output. To be specific, there should be no statistical correlation. There should be no statistical correlation between the bits of the input and bits of the output. Here input is the message and output is the digest. So suppose this is the message and this is the output. Now how many ones are there in the input and how many ones are there in the output? If there are more number of ones in the input and we observe that there are more number of ones in the output, then there is a statistical correlation. It is not expected. Two messages. This message has a higher number of ones and this has lower number of ones. From this we can conclude nothing whether their corresponding outputs will have higher or lower. We cannot predict anything without computing. Not only that, so total number of ones is one statistic. Total number of ones is one statistic. Similarly, another statistic could be even or odd, like we call these things even parity, odd parity. Number of ones are even or odd in the input. It has no relation with the number of events are even or odd in the output. So now even or odd is one, another statistic, binary statistic. There could be other like frequency of one. Frequency of one. How frequently one is coming in the stream. Longest run of ones. There are many. There are many statistics of a stream. Now the statistics of input and statistics of output should not have any relation. We call this thing statistical correlation. There should be no statistical correlation between the message and the output. And actually this is called randomness. If you give me a message, the output will be completely random. Random string of zeros and ones of L bits. It has no relation with the bits of message. Of course, you are calculating using a deterministic algorithm, meaning it has a relation. Relation in the sense not statistical relation, it is computed from the bits of the input. But there is no statistical correlation. And so the effect is like you are picking one element randomly. Right? Now I don't know how this hash algorithm will be implemented. Now think how can I simply, so I have a bucket of 2 power L, size of the bucket is 2 power L, to be specific -1, I am ignoring one element. So the size is 2 power L elements, so there. Now whenever you, so I have to become a random oracle. How can I become a random oracle? Whenever you give me a message, I pick one element randomly and show it to you. This is your output. Then again put it here. But if I do this thing, then I cannot ensure the randomness property. So what can I do? Simple thing. This thing I have to record in a table, that for the first time when you are giving me a message, I am recording this is the message and this is the digest. This is the message and this is the digest. Next time some query comes to me, I will first check my record. If the record is already there, then I will not pick anything from there. I will just retrieve the value and give it to you. But if I cannot find it there, then again I will pick another random element from here and show to you. Now, if I follow this algorithm, then I can ensure both randomness and repetition property. Now, what is independence? Independence says that output of one should not depend on output of the other. That means if there are two messages, M1 and M2, the two messages are almost the same, only except the last bit. Only except the last bit is different. Suppose all the other bits are same. That does not mean that their outputs also will be almost same. You cannot distinguish actually which one is the output of which one. Or even you cannot distinguish the output of these two messages with the output of other messages. So this is called independence. The messages are similar. That does not mean that the output or dissimilar. That has no implication on the outputs, that whether they will be similar or dissimilar. Okay. So that is called independence. So this way, if I blindly pick the things, then independence also I can ensure, because you are giving me the first message, I am picking one element from this bucket randomly. When you are giving me the second message, if that is not the same as the first one, then whether all the bits are same or whether all the bits are different, I am just picking one blindly from the bucket. So that has no relation on the output. So this algorithm that I am following, that I am picking this one blindly and recording it, is able to satisfy all the three properties. So if your hash algorithm, whether it is SHA-1, SHA-256, whirlpool, is also behaving like a random, is also satisfying the three properties, then it can be proved that it is pre-image resistant. Actually, this was included in the course. If you open the network security book version, you will see it has been proved. The proofs are given in the appendix that if random oracle model is followed, these problems are stated with an analogous example called birthday problems. First birthday problem, second birthday problem, like that. That actually proves that if one function satisfies the properties of random oracle model, then pre-image resistance is high. That means it is pre-image resistant. High meaning it cannot be less than exponential 10. Solving the pre-image given the output cannot be done less than exponential time. So it has been proved that the function will be pre-image resistant, second pre-image resistant and collision resistant if these three properties are satisfied. Now what do we have to check? Suppose somebody SHA-1 exists, SHA-256 exists, somebody tomorrow invents SHA-456 and some company and submits it to us. We have to test whether randomness, independence and of course repetition properties are satisfied. Basically randomness and independence properties are satisfied or not. That testing we have to do, and that testing can be done by experimentation only without any mathematical analysis. You run the invented hash algorithm with millions of inputs and record the output and check whether the outputs are coming randomly, independently. And for that we have various softwares available also. So we use this random oracle model to check the security of any newly invented hash algorithm. That's why this is called random oracle model for hash functions. Now let us forget about the third property. If it is a deterministic algorithm, then third property must be satisfied. So the first two properties are very important, randomness and independence. So in general, see, hash function, in general, hash function, the input domain must not be 0, 1, n or 0, 1 star. It can be any set. The output domain or codomain also can be any set. So that means in general the hash function can be from, or in general we say group or field, whatever. So it can be from any group G1 to G2 or S1 to S2. Fine. Now on this, what is the meaning of randomness and independence? That the output of this function should be uniform random over S2. This is H from S1 to S2. The first two properties jointly implying the statement that the output of this function is uniformly random over S2. That means, what is the meaning of this? That means if you take successive inputs from this set S1 but randomly, then the outputs will be, successive outputs will be uniformly random over S2. Could you understand the meaning of uniformly random? That means, suppose this is one value, this is one value, this is one value, this is one value. These are all the values of S2. These are all the values. This value name is Manohar, this value name is Sujit, this value name is Pratik, this value name is Rahul, etc. These are all possible values of S2. Now, you are taking random elements from S1 successively. एक के बाद एक. You are taking 1 million values you have taken. But remember, in S2 you don't have 1 million values. You have hardly, all the students of this class may be maximum 50. Okay. Now the first one is outputting Sujit. The second input I took, it output Manohar. Third input again created output Sujit. In this way it is generating the outputs. Now I am counting the frequency of histogram, you understand? Count how many times particular output is generated. Then that I am plotting in the y-axis. So it should be like this. Or it should not have any other pattern like Gaussian or exponential or something. It is uniformly random. Meaning if I take 1 million inputs from S1, then 1 million by 50 times Sujit will be generated, 1 million by 50 times Manohar will be generated, etc. This is called uniform randomness. So, actually it can be proved, by analysis it can be proved that if this is satisfied, then these two properties are satisfied. Randomness of course is coming. Independence also is implied by that thing. So, random oracle model can be stated in that way also. That if you take random elements from this set S1, the outputs will be uniformly random over S2. Uniformly random over S2. Understood? Hash function is a mapping, uniform random mapping from the codomain to codomain. Now, so what this hash function is doing? Stated in English, not in mathematical, it is written in mathematical notations. In simple English, you state what this hash function will do. 1 and p minus 1. So, it will take any number between 1 and p minus 1. And what will be the output? An n-bit string. And this should be uniform random. That means this function is taking any random prime number from 1 to a random integer from 1 to p minus 1, and the output is uniformly distributed over n-bit strings, all n-bit strings. Similarly, so can you explain this thing H2? 2 n-bit strings. The input to this function is 2 n-bit strings. The domain of this function is the Cartesian product of n-bit strings. So, the input is a pair of n-bit strings, a pair meaning 2 n-bit strings, and output is a number between 1 and p minus 1, and which is uniformly distributed over 1 and p minus 1. Similarly, other two hash functions also we can explain by yourself, like here n-bit string input, point output, any point on elliptic curve. 1 n-bit string output is also n-bit. So, this is a kind of permutation actually. 1 n-bit string producing another n-bit string and uniform random. This is a permutation, and these are the 4 hash functions. You don't have to remember, please remember, in research you don't have to remember anything. You don't have to remember these steps. You don't have to remember these definitions, but you have to understand the definitions. You have to write paper that you are writing sitting at your home or at your lab, where every note, every Google, everything is in your hand, every book is in your hand. So, whenever you wish, you can open the notes and check the content. So, you don't have to keep these things inside your memory. Even when you face a viva, defense. You have the slides with you. You can keep your notes with you also. You are supposed to explain those things with the help of your notes or something. So, understanding is important. By checking these equations, by seeing the equations, you don't get afraid that how can I remember these things. So, this is only the setup algorithm. Now, we will move on to the next algorithms. Extract algorithm is very simple algorithm. So, again recall, last class we have discussed what is extract algorithm, extract key extraction algorithm actually. So, it takes identity of the user and produces the private key for it. What are the steps? So, ID is any arbitrary string and private key. So, first it is generating, meaning it is giving input. So, H3 you see, it inputs an arbitrary string of any length and produces one point on the elliptic curve. So, we are giving ID to H3 as the input, so it should produce one point on the elliptic curve. So, that point is QID, denoted as QID. So, that means essentially what we did, we translated the identity. It could be your Aadhaar number, it could be your email ID, as I have already stated. Whatever be your unique identity, we are translating it into an unique point in the elliptic curve. Unique point on the elliptic curve. So, that point is QID, point corresponding to ID. Then we are doing a point multiplication. We meaning who is running this algorithm again, recall. This is run by the PKG. It is generating your private key and PKG holds the master secret S. So, it multiplies this QID with S. S is the master secret. Point multiplication. So, what will be the result? Another point. This point, see here, you might be confused that it is written in, usually all the points here written in capital letter and all the scalars are written in small letter. However, here we are writing it in small letter D, but it is a point also. Why I have used this notation? Because the original paper you have used this notation. So, I have not changed it. But remember that this DID is a point here. In some papers, so you must be careful. In some papers they generate scalar as the private key. In some papers they generate point as the, point is not a scalar, you remember. Point has two dimensions, X and Y. So, this DID is your private key. So, private key extraction algorithm is very simple. In the PKG, you give me your identity, I generate a point, I map your identity into a point, then multiply that point with my secret. That is the private key, I return it to you next. Next is the encrypt and decrypt algorithm. So, encrypt algorithm will take what? Of course, the message and all the parameters, public parameters, PPUB basically and all the other functions and the public key, and that means essentially the identity. This is identity based cryptography. So, these are the inputs. See, inputs are the message, the identity to whom it should be sent and the parameters. Parameters include all the things, the elliptic curve, the prime numbers P and Q, the N, the P, PPUB, bilinear map, all the 4 hash functions M and C, all are supposed to be global, known to even the attacker. Now, here we do not need any private key or master secret because this is only an encryption. See the steps. Again, don't worry about the complexity of the steps, you don't need to remember the steps, but you have to understand the steps. How it is working? The first step, again, the same thing actually. First, mapping the identity to unique point in the elliptic curve, QID. Then, what is the meaning of this actually? See, this is a notation. It states that you are taking an element at random. This R stands for random. You are taking an element at random. From where? This domain. What is the domain? N bit strings. And assigning it to sigma. Sigma is a variable. So, stating it in other words, sigma is a randomly chosen n bit string. If you state it in simple English, sigma is a randomly chosen n bit string. So I have chosen a randomly. See, again, if you recall Elgamal encryption that we have discussed last class. So any encryption algorithm takes message, of course, takes the public parameter, takes the public key. In addition, it takes a random number. Is not it true? Because the purpose I have already described, that otherwise same message will not generate the different ciphertext. Here, this is the randomness that we are introducing in the encryption algorithm. We are taking a random n bit string. Remember again that the message size is also n bits. So we are introducing a random n bit string. Then what we are doing? We are actually mixing this hash function. Go back 2 slides. H2 is taking 2 n bit strings and producing one element in FQ. Come back. So sigma is an n bit string, randomly generated n bit string. M is the message, which is of course an n bit string. We are mixing the 2 strings and generating the output R. So R must be one element in FQ according to the definition of that hash function. That means something between an integer between 1 and q minus 1. An integer between 1 and q minus 1. We have generated from what? By mixing the random string and the given message. So actually R is a function of the randomness and message. Is a function of randomness and message. Sigma is the randomness. If you repeat this algorithm many times with the same message, sigma will be different. So R's will be different. Now what we are doing? We are calculating. Now see, only in step 4 of this algorithm, only in step 4 we are using this bilinear function. All other operations are normal cryptographic operations that we have already studied. Only step 4 we are using this bilinear map. Bilinear map takes 2 points. The first point here we are giving is the QID, point corresponding to the identity of that, and the second one is PPUB. We can give these 2 points, nobody can prevent us, we can give these 2 points. And E is supposed to produce one output, which is an element in E is G1 to G2, and G2 is in this case FP. So that is an integer between 1 and p minus 1, alright, FP meaning 1 and 2. So that is GID. Let's say that is GID. So GID is what? R is also an integer, GID is also an integer. R is something between 1 and q minus 1 and GID is something between 1 and p minus 1. Very simple. Then what we are doing? We are calculating one term called V and another term called U. And 3 terms and a term called W. And the ciphertext is actually UVW. Because we have already discussed that the ciphertext is combination of 3 parts. First one should be a point, second one should be an n-bit string, third one should be an n-bit string. Here you will see U is a point, V is a W, both are n-bit strings. First see how we were generating U, R dot P. R is an integer between 1 and q minus 1. P is the generator point. So when you do R dot P, this is a point multiplication. It is supposed to generate a point, and since R is in between 1 and Q, we have already seen. So that means it should generate a point on that elliptic curve only, because the order of the elliptic curve is Q. P is the generator. So some point in the elliptic curve is U. Why we are generating these things, that I will explain later. What we are doing first I am explaining. Why we are doing these things I will come later. Then V. What is V? This sigma, the n-bit random string that we have generated, we are doing bit-wise XOR. In the last class I have explained that bit-wise XOR is actually masking the data. Masking the data with what? With this item. What is the item? H1 of GID power R. Step by step you understand. What is GID? An integer. We have already calculated 1 to p minus 1. What is R? R is also an integer. So integer for integer, modular exponentiation we can do, easy. Modular exponentiation is easy. All the things are mod something, we are not writing that thing. Then come back to slides. H1 takes one element in 1 to p minus 1, FP, prime field, and n bit string, produces n bit string. So here GID power R is a modular exponent. Everything is in mod p. That we are not mentioning, but everything is in mod p. So this is a modular exponentiation, not normal exponentiation. So GID power R mod p. So that means this is actually something between 1 and p minus 1. Modular exponentiation. So this is something between 1 and p minus 1. That means element in FP taking as the input H1 and supposed to produce what? What was the definition? N bit string. So that means essentially what we are doing, we are mapping this G and R. In short, I am saying this is G. To be specific, this is GID. This is mapping the combination of G and R into an n bit string. This understanding is very important, not to just remember the equations. Why we are doing? Purposefully, why we are doing? This is not that randomly we have combined some exponentiation and bilinear pairing and then something luckily matched, and then not like that. Purposefully it has been done, and that you have to understand so that you can design new cryptographic algorithm. So here what we have done, we are mapping this G and R into an n bit string. This n bit string we are using to mask sigma. Finally, you see, go back to slides. H4 is taking one n bit string, producing another n bit string, then doing on permutation only. Come back. This sigma is an n bit string. So H4 of sigma is also an n bit string to n bit string. M is an n bit string. So what exactly we are doing in W? We are masking M by H4 of sigma. You see, H4 is a public function. Everyone knows what is H4. Attacker also knows what is H4. So simply we can say that in W we are masking M by sigma. Understood? In W, inside W, like have you heard about steganography? Inside a picture we hide some information. Similarly, here inside W we are hiding M, masking M with the help